Hi, my name is Preetika Rao. I'm a model and actor from Mumbai, India, and today I have Dr. Robert Svoboda on my channel. Dr. Robert came to India in his early 20s to learn Ayurveda at a college in Pune. However, he ended up meeting an Aghori named Vimlananda, who later on became his guru. Vimlananda introduced him to the world of Aghori Shastra and Tantra Vidya. However, Dr. Robert also ended up learning Vastu Shastra and astrology from India. Today I'm going to be talking to him about Rishi Munis and astral travel, Devis and mantras, the world of spirits and spirit attachments, but I promise this will not be a very dark episode. Dr. Robert, namaste, welcome on my channel. And thank you. I think I contacted you a few months back and then you said you're actually traveling to Mumbai so you can do this podcast with me live. So I'm really honored and happy to have you live with me on my channel.
Thank you.
So let's begin with astral travel because that's a very interesting topic. And, so the Indian culture is always talking about astral travel and our Rishi Munis doing astral travel. Also, astrology. It's very fascinating for me to realize that 5,000 years back, our Rishi Munis actually described the universe, called it Brahmand, described the planets and the nakshatras and all of that. It's so fascinating. So what was actually happening? Were they blessed with some kind of divine knowledge or intervention? What was actually happening?
They were definitely blessed with divine knowledge. But the main difference between then and now is the difference between two Sanskrit words. One is bahya and the other is abhyantara. Bahya means external, outside. Abhyantara means internal, inside. So there is the world in which you and I are living, the physical world. It's the world of the five Mahabhutas, earth, water, fire, air, and space. And in it, we are living, but we are not physical ourselves. We are of something that is much more refined in quality. And so the human awareness and the awareness of other animals and plants and the awareness of those things that don't have bodies, they live on a different plane of reality. So we have the physical plane of reality, or sometimes it's, for a human being, it's called the Annamaya Kosha. So the Annamaya Kosha, that's the physical body. And it's fed by food, and it's made sick by food, and it is healed by food. And then there's the Pranamaya Kosha. And so prana is the life force, and prana is what is really important in the world. And there is, in every individual, there is another body that is made up of prana. It's made up of the Chinese say they're meridians and we call them nadis, but it's all basically the same thing. And more refined than prana is the manomaya kosha. And so the manomaya kosha, or the sukshma sharira, is the astral world. And the astral world is where all of the emotions and thoughts and ideas and all kinds of other things exist. And so when a human being has awareness because of having a body, it doesn't necessarily look exactly like the physical body, but it's more or less in the same context that the physical body is. And we can call that the astral body, the sukshma sharir. And that is what leaves your organism at the time that you die. So when you're alive, you have the physical body and the astral body, and they're connected together by the pranamaya kosh, by the prana. Okay. When your body cannot hold on to prana anymore, then your astral body leaves.
Okay.
But sometimes what happens is, if you do a particular kind of sadhana, a particular kind of practice, then you can take your astral body and you can remove it from your physical body without dying. And that's what, certainly there are people who aren't even spiritually evolved who can do this. But generally, it's more the people who have done a lot of spiritual practice and who have taken their awareness and made it very sukshma, very subtle, very refined. And that allows them to emerge from the physical body and move around in the astral world and then come back to the physical body. So back in the time of the Rishis and the Munis and the Naths and the Siddhas and so on, there was not all of the things that we have now. Nowadays we have big cities and we have cars and we have air conditioner. We have all kinds of things external to us. Back then there was very little external to you. Nowadays, everyone's attention is very much externalized. Back then, you didn't have things to draw your attention, so people focused their attention internally. And according to the basic principle of Indian philosophy, everything that is on the inside is also on the outside. Sometimes in Sanskrit, that's called the Pinda Brahmanda Nyaya, or the Loka Purusha Samhita. There's the microcosm, that's the human being, and the macrocosm, that's the universe. But they reflect one another. And so anything that you can do externally, you can also do internally in a slightly different way. So we now have big telescopes and we can see back to almost the beginning of the universe, back almost to the Big Bang. And instead of using a big telescope, the rishis would go inside instead. And so they could find out things about the external universe by looking inside. They would still make observations, for example, in the case of the nakshatras, to get the qualities, the gunas of the nakshatras, they would pay attention to what was happening in that aspect of space. But in order to really understand what was going on, they wouldn't project their attention only externally, they would project it internally also to be able to have the reality of that space resonate inside them.
So their body would be here and they could just leave their body and travel?
Yes.
Okay.
And people are still able to do this. My mentor Vimalananda ji could do this. And his guru, Jatal Sadhu Ram Vishwambar Das, could do this. In fact, his guru, whose samadhi is at Simhachalam near Vishakhapatnam, came to Mumbai a couple of times. And once he made it, I was not here then. I did meet Jatal Sadhu many times, but this was maybe this was almost 70 years ago. He came and he deliberately came and visited someone in his astral form so that that person would understand that it is possible for such things to happen.
I've read this happening in, the book, Yogananda's book, where he says that his guru could be seen at two different places at the same time.
Yes. And there are still people, well, I don't know if there are still people back when, certainly when Guru Maharaj, when Jatal Sadhu was alive, there were certainly cases of him being seen in two different places at the same time. So for people like him, it's not a big thing because they know how to do it. For you and me, it's a very big thing. But for someone like that, it's not a big thing.
Is that how they discovered the existence of different planes like Devi Loka and, Nag Loka or Patal Loka? Is that how they discovered it?
That's exactly how they discovered it. Because the lokas that exist externally can also be found inside the human body. So there's 7 patalas and there's 7 swargas. So the 7 patalas are from more or less from the waist down, and the 7 swargas are more or less from the waist up. So they could use these parts of the body as kind of as a base, and from there project their awareness into whatever loka they wanted to go to. And I mean, we talk about those 14 lokas, but honestly, there's no limit to the number of lokas. It's very, very much like what we have now in virtual reality, in cyberspace. We've created an astral reality that is a fake astral reality, but it's externalized. But you can create any number of domains, and it's the same way in the astral world. You can create any number of domains you want to, according to how much Shakti you've got and what you want to do with that Shakti. And just think about the word Loka. In Sanskrit, Loka really means to see. It's related to the word Lochana, which means the eye or sight. And so a Loka is the space that you can see. So you, simply by virtue of seeing, and what does the word Rishi mean? Rishir darshanat. A Rishi is someone who is able to see. So they use the power of visualization to create whatever kind of reality they want to create. Mm-hmm. That's what we're doing with cyberspace. But the difference is the Rishis did not need giant server farms, and they did not need all kinds of complicated silicon reality. They used carbon-based reality, and they used the subtlety of their awareness to do the same thing, actually even better than what we're doing with our fake astral world.
I read a book on Dattatreya, and this entire book, it's like a pothi that you're supposed to read, Parayan, that you're supposed to do. It has mention of all of this esoteric world, and they actually say that every planet has a loka, like Sun has a loka, Saturn has a loka.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many other different planes and that exist, like Apsaras, and of course, I'm sure you know about it. But that was very fascinating to know that even planets would have a loka. Have you ever heard of that?
Of course, definitely. And you can, the people who are temporarily on Earth, there may be some reason why they have come from one of those lokas. They may go back to one of those lokas. And of course, they're even further out loka, like Uranus and Neptune and Pluto and Sedna, and but the further out you get from the sun, the colder it is, the darker it is, and this is why all sorts of people from all sorts of lokas want to come to Loka, to Prithvi, in order to experience what life is like in the Panchabhautik Sharira.
You know, at this point, it reminds me of this incident that one of my friends narrated to me. So he was based out of Hyderabad, and his friend randomly picked a book of mantras and started, doing it, performing it. This book had, of course, all the directions that you're supposed to follow, and the number of times you're supposed to chant the mantra and all of that. And he just randomly picked it up and started doing it. And then there was this Devi who appeared before him from another dimension, another loka. And she was not like Lakshmi or Durga or Kali, Saraswati, whom we are familiar with. She was different, just a random Devi. Now, I don't know if it was an Apsara or if it was just a Devi from the Deva Loka, I don't know. But she started, responding, and she would just appear. And then, of course, he freaked out, and he wanted her to go back. But she was so happy being here that she said, I can make you rich, and I have so many boons, I can give you boons, and, but I'm happy, I like this plane, I don't want to leave. And she would just appear, at 3 a.m. and she would appear all the time, and he was like petrified. And then, of course, he had to, perform practices and take aid of people, maybe Tantra Vidya, I'm not sure what he did, but finally they had to send her back to her loka. So have you also experienced something like this, or have you heard of something like this?
Well, fortunately, I haven't experienced anything like this, but I've definitely heard about this. Certainly, my mentor Vimalananda was out in the forest at one point, and he heard somebody saying to him, "Meow," meaning, "Shall I come?" And he kept hearing this, "Meow, meow." And he was kind of a short-tempered person, so at At some point, he lost his patience and said, "Anahanto." And so when he did that, then this thing who was a Yakshni, and a Yakshni is, let's call her a demigod. She entered into his space. Basically, it was kind of like being possessed by her, but not exactly. Because, I mean, possession is where you are actually embodying her or him or whatever it may be. But she was then with him all the time. And he was not able to get rid of her without quite a lot of effort. And I had a friend who has been a yoga teacher for many decades, and he became very interested in the Shiva Tandava Stotra, which was written by Ravana. It's a very beautiful stotra, but it's very strong, and it's for a strong version of Shiva. And he was reciting it, and he was enjoying it, until one day, Bhairava showed up, and basically, I mean, and not in so many words, asked him what he thought he was doing. And then he had to ask himself what he thought he was doing, because mantra is the incarnation of a devata in verbal form. So you start reciting a mantra, you're basically in your own astral body encouraging the form of that devata to be created. If you don't know who you're inviting, I mean, it's the same sort of thing if you go to the front door and you open it and somebody says they want to come in, and you let them in, you don't know that person, you should not be surprised if something weird happens. It's also useful to remember that just because someone says that he is a deva or she is a devi, how are you going to know? Unless you're already familiar with that deva, you can get somebody who is a yakshini, or even someone who's not even that advanced, who will say, I'm a devi. And are you going to be able to determine the difference between her and a real devi? Not unless you have already been educated in that direction. So you should think about mantras and yantras and things like this as actually having some kind of power. And in the same way, you would not stick your finger into the socket. You might plug something into the socket on the wall, but you would hopefully not stick your finger in there. In the same way, you would first want to ask yourself, what do I want to do? And who do I really want to attract? And for what purpose do I want to attract this person? Ask yourself these questions, make sure you know what you're doing first, and then go ahead.
This is true also for, the conventional Indian devas and devis whom we worship, like Ganpati and Vishnu and Lakshmi. Is this true of them too?
Well, to some degree it is. I mean, for example, right now we're having the Shri Ganesh Utsava. But you'll notice that all of these Ganapatis that are out in the street, these all have his tunda, his sund, towards his left, not towards his right. And the Siddhivinayaka has the tunda towards the right. There's a big difference between those two Ganapatis. One of them, you would always want to respect any Ganapati, but you don't have to worship it regularly with a certain amount of attention like you do a Siddhivinayak. So yes, if you're going to invite Ganapati into your house, you want to invite one that you're going to take proper care of, and you will want to know which one is the right one for you to be taking care of.
So do we need to take any kind of precautions just before we chant a mantra? Like, for instance, take a bath, or do it at a certain time, not do it at midnight. Are there any restrictions?
There are restrictions according to the deity. And your restrictions according to whether you're trying to do something that is saumya or ugra. Saumya means gentle. Ugra means intense. It's important for everybody to ask himself or herself, what do you want? This is your life. And When you're young, it seems like, oh, there's all kinds of time. When you get to be my age, you realize that life went by really, really quickly. So you want to ask yourselves, what do you want? And the reason to have an alignment with a devata, I mean, some people do it because they want, they go to Lakshmi because they want money, and they go to Shiva or the Devi because they want some kind of Shakti. But you should be thinking about the fact that you're alive right now. You're not going to be alive permanently. You're going to have to take Janma again. And what you should be thinking about is, what are my responsibilities in this lifetime? And what is the devata that is right for me in this lifetime to assist me to fulfill those responsibilities, so I will take care of as much of what needs to be taken care of in my life during this period before I pass on. Now, it is true that if you look at someone's kundali, someone's horoscope, especially if you look at their 5th house, you can generally get an idea of whether it's better for that person to be worshiping a Saumya, a gentle devata, or an Ugra, a more intense devata. So it's good to know something also about your nature, and astrology is good for this also. I belong to the Rakshasa Gana, so it's natural for me to do things that are more Ugra. But someone who belongs to the Manusya Gana, or even better, the Deva Gana, they tend to do things that are more Saumya, more gentle, and so on. So it is better to understand your own nature as best you can, your swabhava, the things that are normal to you. And then you ask yourself, what direction do I want to go in? What is my purpose in life? What dharma am I trying to, and dharma is not religion. Dharma is the path that you personally need to walk. What have you been born to do? Have you been born to spend more time with your family or less time with your family? Have you been born to work a lot or not work a whole lot? Have you been born to focus on meditating and worshiping and so on? Or have you been born to do something out in the world? Hopefully you have a guru, or your parents are well informed, or you have a good astrologer, or somebody can give you some kind of advice when you're young, so as you develop, you can move in a good direction. And then it becomes easier for you to figure out what is the right devata for you. It is sometimes the case that you will want to focus on your Kula Deva. Kula means your family. Because I was just talking to somebody a few weeks ago who had only recently discovered what her Kula Devi was. Her family had been worshiping this Kula Devi for several generations, but the last generation or two, that worship had not been continued. And that was the reason for the problems, or not all of them, but many of the problems that were happening in the family. So once she returned to the worship of that Devi that had been worshipped for several generations in her family, things started to move in the right direction.
I've also heard of your ancestors creating a havoc in your life, Pitrudosh as they call it. And I really cannot understand why would that happen, and how does this entire thing work? Do they really cause hurdles like hurdles in your path? Where anything in your life is concerned. It could be health, or it could be just anything. Do ancestors really do that?
There's infinite possibilities, but it is generally the case that when someone dies, they really are not quite ready to die. They had some desires that were still remaining, and the desires were not fulfilled. They left the body. The desires are still there. Yes, they will get reborn somewhere, but those desires are still there. So that now the desires are almost operating separate from the Pitru. So sometimes the actual Pitru may be causing trouble for you. Sometimes it may just be the desires of the Pitru. And the fact is that the ancestors gave you your DNA. And that DNA is that you can't separate, as long as you have a physical body and you're connected to it, you're connected to the bloodline that has brought you to where you are. And everything that's in that bloodline, everything that has been all of the different problems and all of the different good things have influenced. They may not have changed your genes and chromosomes, but they may have changed your epigenetics. They may have caused certain genes to turn on and other ones to turn off. And the pattern of what's happening with that genetic can influence you your entire life long. So you have inherited that from your ancestor. And because you've inherited that, that means that you are sensitive to whatever kind of attitudes that ancestor had, whether you knew that ancestor or not. But it's much more, of course, the influence is much greater with your parents and almost as great with your grandparents and a little bit less with your great-grandparents. But the great-grandparents strongly influenced their children, who strongly influenced their children, who strongly influenced you. So your ancestors absolutely can have a strong influence on you. And I'm glad we brought this up because very shortly, in fact on Thursday, will be Ananta Chaturdashi, and we will say goodbye to Ganapati Bappa Moria Pudyatsa Varsha Lokarya. And come back soon next year. But goodbye for now. And then one day later, there will be the Purnima, and then we will have the Pitru Paksha. We'll have the ancestor fortnight. Yes. And that is the perfect, it's good to worship the ancestors anytime during the year on the new moon. Okay. I mean, you can do it during any time, but it's always better in the Krishna Paksha, in the waning fortnight of the moon, and especially on the new moon. The new moon is special for the ancestor. But during the Pitru Paksha, the whole fortnight, the whole 2 weeks is dedicated to the ancestors. And at the end of that, this year it's going to be October 14, we'll have Sarva Pitru Amavasya, the new moon for all the ancestors. If you can go sit by a stream or a river or the sea, that's good. If not, you can just sit in your house and get some water and some milk and some black sesame seeds, and invite your ancestors to come sit in front of you and say, thank you very much. It's thanks to you that I'm alive. But I'm sure that you died with some desires that were still remaining. So symbolically, I'm going to offer you this water and this milk and these black sesame seeds. And I would like very much for you to accept them and let those desires that you have, just let them drop so you can continue to evolve in a good direction. You can almost use any kind of mantra because it should be, preferably a mantra that you've been repeating so it will have some Shakti, not just some random mantra that you haven't repeated, even if it's supposed to be for the Pitrus, because it won't have as much Shakti. You get Shakti by putting your attention and your prana into a mantra. That's how the mantra gets Shakti. So you put this in your hand, you repeat the mantra, and you say, Swada, and you let that fall onto the ground, or if you're in your house, onto a thali that you can then pour onto a peepal tree or something. And so you make at least one offering for each ancestor, and then you say, thank you very much, and you request them to go back to where they came from, swasthana gacha. You can do that any day during the Pitru Paksha, especially on that new moon, Amavasya, but it has to be done between sunrise and noon. And it's not like you're inviting the ancestor to come into your body. You're asking them to sit over there. It's a good idea to always remember that maintaining a good boundary is a good thing. It's nice to be able to close the door at night and know that the gundas are not going to be able to come in the door because you've closed the door and the door is locked.
But how do you do that? Because I don't know if you need to be trained into a particular vidya in order to do that, or you can just do it with your free will.
Well, obviously, if you have some vidya, you're going to, then you will have the 3 locks, and then you will also have a couple of video cameras, and you will have the chokidar. You'll have 2 or 3 chokidars. That would be great. But if you can't do that, at least what you should, and hopefully if you don't have all of that, maybe you have already established some kind of relationship with some devata, then that devata will be assisting you with that. Maybe you don't even know that. At the very least, what you can do is you can sit down and you can breathe calmly and you can make your mind free of thoughts as possible. And then you can visualize, let's say, the sun. Because the sun is sending light in all directions. And where there is light, it's much more difficult for, things of the night to remain. So you visualize the sun, and then you request the sun to send golden light down into you. And you request the golden light to go out at least this far away, arm's length from you. So, if you have lots of energy, you can project it even further. But if you don't, at least project it out this much. So what's really important is to be able to circulate your prana properly in your body. And you will be able to do that if you, number one, are eating properly, exercising properly, getting enough sleep, etc. These are all the things that everyone needs to do. If you're not doing that, that is going to make you more sensitive to things like the ancestors and the black magic and the God only knows what else. So at the very least, if you don't know anything else to do, request bright golden light to come into you and extend out this far and just keep focusing on that.
Like a protection.
That can be your protection. If you can have better quality protection, then that's even better. But at least that much will give you some protection.
Otherwise, you have a guru and then you follow the path of Sudarshan Kriya and practice pranayam, and
that would be good.
That would be great.
If you have a guru, then it becomes the guru's responsibility to look after you. In fact, the word guru literally means heavy in Sanskrit. One of the reasons why they use that word guru is because the disciple, the shishya, is trying to go from being stuck in the 5 elements here, so that and to try to become much more subtle and to move into the astral world. But if you try to move your attention into the astral world without being stable in your body, you can create a bunch of physical problems for yourself.
Okay.
So what the guru will do is will provide you a certain kind of heaviness. It's like ballast in a balloon or ballast in a ship. It provides a certain sort of very refined and very subtle heaviness that assists the disciple to move off into the astral world, but not get completely discombobulated while doing so.
So I'm reading this book by Swami Rama. It's called Living with the Himalayan Masters, where he's describing these caves in the Himalayas around 14,000 feet above, which date around 4,000 to 5,000 years back, which has this legacy and tradition of sadhus who are practicing meditation. Have you been to the Himalayas often, and have you really encountered people like that?
There are still some good people up in the Himalaya, for example. But generally speaking, they want to not interact with people because they want to do their own sadhana, and they want to be able to, if they're really advanced, to have time to focus on doing good things for the whole world. I went up to Gomukh. Gomukh is where the Bhagirathi River that becomes the Ganga eventually, where it starts from. And if you go beyond Gomukh and climb further, you'll come to a place called Tapovan. I went there in 1995. And at that time, there was a very fine sadhavi who was from Mangalore. Okay. And she had been living up there for several years. Occasionally she would come down in the winter, but many times, many years, she had just stayed there even in the winter, because in the winter up there, after about the middle of November, there's so much snow, nobody can go anywhere. So you need to make sure you have enough fuel and enough food, or you're not going to survive the winter. So she had spent several winters up there, but eventually she ended up coming down from Tapovan. And the reason she came down was because so many people had heard about her. They were coming up and they wanted to see her and they wanted to get her blessing, and they were interfering with her sadhana. So this is why it is very difficult to find somebody who is really genuine up in the Himalaya, because the ones who are really genuine will find a way to make it difficult for you to locate them.
So this sadhana that they all are doing up there at the Himalayas, it's somewhere helping the world, is it? It's like it has a direct influence on all of us?
Absolutely. So, I mean, for example, they say that the 9 Naths, Matsyendranath, Gorakhnath, Jalandharnath, etc., are always going on pilgrimage, on Tirtha Yatra. And most people, like you and me, we go on Tirtha Yatra to collect some good vibrations and to get rid of our bad karmas. But what the Naths do is they go to these Tirtha spots, like the Himalaya, like Amarkantaka, like so many different places, and they, with their own sadhana, they purify those places so they will still be available for you and me to go there and get purified at. So once a person gets to be a developed enough in the spiritual world, they're not bothering to add more Shakti for themselves. They are now focusing on what they can do to try to assist the world in general.
Also, I want to speak about, this concept of spirit attachments and black magic. We'll come to that later. I've heard that, I've heard incidents where there was a guy, who kept hearing the sound of a pile every night. Every time he went to sleep, he could hear the sound of this pile. And it went on for days. And eventually initially he of course got scared, and then he couldn't care a damn because it happened every night and he would get so exhausted that he needed his sleep. But, and I've heard some stuff like this with happening to women also. So do spirit attachments happen very easily? I mean, are they so easy to happen? Like, is everybody prone to it?
I wouldn't say that everybody is prone to it. Okay. Some people are more sensitive than others. Some people are closer to the astral world than others. If you're a person who is very much connected to the physical world, it's more difficult for some sort of astral being to come and attach itself to you. If you are experimenting with exploring around in the astral world, then it will be easier. But yes, occasionally it does happen. I remember an incident from my time with Vimalananda. There was, just a fairly ordinary guy, and he had gone out to Chowpatty, the beach in the South Bombay Chowpatty. Yeah. And we're talking about 40 years ago probably. And he had gone, what do you do on Chowpatty? You eat some bel puri and you kind of look around. And he decided that he needed to relieve himself. So he went to pee under a tree, but it just so happened there was a spirit in the tree, and at the fact of urinating next to this tree where the spirit was there created a situation that permitted the spirit to become attached to him. It became a problem for him, and Vimalananda tried to remove the spirit entirely. That was very difficult. So at least he got to the point where the spirit was minimized. Sometimes you can remove it entirely, sometimes you can't. This is not as common, thankfully, as it might be, but it's definitely the case that if you are a sensitive person, that you would like to avoid spending a lot of time in cemeteries or cremation grounds or something like that. You'd like to avoid spending a lot of time in places where there are a lot, and why? Because there are a lot of spirits in those places. Other places where there are, where there may have been battlefields, places where any place where there has been a lot of turmoil. I visited Auschwitz with a colleague of mine, and actually it was during the Pitru Paksha, and we actually did Tarpana in the river where the ashes of hundreds of thousands of people had been deposited. And that was extremely, we both became sick immediately afterwards because of the influence of even trying to have a positive effect, a tiny positive effect on that immense amount of misery that had been generated there. So if you're a sensitive person, you want to avoid places like that. And especially if you're female, during your menstrual period, you definitely, because you're very open during that period of time, and it's just, that is really a great period, a great moment, those, especially the first 3 days, just to be on your own, or to be with other women who are in the menstrual hut or the red tent or something like that. So you're in a nice, well encapsulated location, so that both your physical body and your astral body can just do what they need to do and not be exposed to things that may not be good for them.
And especially in India, in cities like Mumbai and Pune, there are so many peepal trees and banyan trees, and you just walk under them all the time while commuting. I find that really dangerous, especially if you're going through your menstrual cycles.
If you're just polite, you don't, you pass by the peepal tree, whatever is in the peepal tree is mostly going to ignore you. It's like spirits have some rights also. So here somebody comes and pisses on your tree. Well, that's going to irritate anybody. If somebody comes and does that on the side of your house, you're going to get annoyed too.
True, yeah.
Just be polite, especially when you're menstruating. Right. And just move through, remember the Devi, and let the Devi handle things.
Nice. Any way of guarding yourself, like keeping yourself protected from spirit attachments?
Well, ideally, again, you have an Ishta Devata. You have a personal deity. And if you're focused on that personal deity, it's going to be difficult for anything. No spirit is going to be able to, if you really are well aligned with your personal deity, it's going to be very much more difficult for a spirit to disturb you. But maybe even if you have an Ishta Devata, maybe you're really sensitive. So you might need to do something a little extra. And so, for example, in the literature, they have things that are called kavacha. Mm-hmm. So a kavacha is a mantra, usually relatively long, that you recite to have a specifically protective effect. Another thing you can do is to wear an amulet of some kind, but that also is a kind of kavacha. And if you know some sort of method, then you can prepare it for yourself. Otherwise, it's quite possible you can find somebody who knows how to prepare those things, and you can get that person to prepare one for you. And then you wear it on your body somewhere, and that has a positive effect. You can wear a rudraksha. It's the one thing that it is important to remember is that you need to have faith in whatever it is that you do. Faith is important because that's what activates your own prana. Right. Your prana is your life force. If your life force is working well, nothing can interfere with you.
Right.
One of the words for faith in Sanskrit is vishvasa. Shvasa means to breathe. Vi, as a prefix in Sanskrit, can mean more than one thing, but in this case it means vishesha. Mm-hmm. So Vishesha Shvasa, Vishwasa is what is faith. So faith is really, it's a kind of breathing. It's a way of breathing, not just physically breathing, but breathing because when you breathe, that's one of the ways you get prana. You also get prana from food. And if you're like Guru Maharaj, you could also get prana directly from the sun. That's a little more difficult to do. But if you're, we're getting prana all the time from breathing. And so if you were bringing in an adequate amount of prana, then you are going to have greater stability. It's going to be more difficult for anything to disturb you. And Vishwasa, faith, is what allows you to connect the prana to whatever it is that needs to be done. So any person who wants to become well from any situation has to have faith in something. Maybe faith in the medicine, maybe faith in the doctor, maybe faith in the medical system, maybe faith in the nurse, maybe faith in God. You have maybe faith in the innate ability of your body to heal itself. But you have to have faith. If you don't have faith, you can't think that doing some puja or wearing a tabiz or something is going to do anything for you. You have to have faith in something, and that something is what's going to do the work for you.
So with all of this knowledge that you have gathered over the years and the research, the profound research that you have done, what is your message to, the youth who are just starting off their life and their career? How would you tell them or guide them? How should they be living their life?
I would say the first thing is, and probably the most important thing is to find out what you are responsible for. I was born in the US, and people there, the motto is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And Vimalananda said, yeah, in the US, you focus on your rights, what you have the right to. Whereas in India, we focus on your responsibilities. And we focus on rana in particular, rana meaning debt. So, and this is, if you look in the Shashtras, it talks about you have a debt to your mother because without her you wouldn't exist. You have a debt to your father because without him you wouldn't exist. You have a debt to the earth that you were born on. You have a debt to your acharya, and if you have a guru, to your guru. You have a debt to whatever vidya you learn. So whatever it is that you're going to do in life, you have to first be thinking about what responsibilities do you have and take care of those responsibilities. And then really you have to find out what should you be doing? What is the right thing for you to do in your life? What is your dharma? Your dharma is what your prana is going to move you in the direction of. And I definitely believe that especially nowadays, the people are focused substantially on screens. There are a number of challenges with the screen. Number one is screens are small. The world is not so small. The screen is small. The screen is two-dimensional. The world is three-dimensional. The screen, you can shift from one reality to another immediately. But that is too fast for the way that your neurology evolved over billions of years. So you have to make sure that you limit the time you spend on your screen. And you have to think about maintaining your health from a young age, because it takes very little, especially nowadays, to ruin your health. And maintaining your health is very simple. Find the right thing to eat. Do not eat too much simple carbohydrate, sugar, white rice, maida, white flour.
Okay.
Eat lots of fruit and vegetables. Do not eat too much. So make sure you get enough sleep. Make sure you get enough exercise. Eat right. And do something to circulate your prana. It could be some kind of yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or whatever it may be, but not just exercise, standard physical exercise, but pranic exercise. Do those simple things first, and then automatically you're going to find it's going to be easier to figure out what else to do because you will be thinking more clearly. It's a good thing for anybody, but especially somebody who's getting started in life, to do at least one 10-day Vipassana course. And the original Vipassana place was just 3 hours away from Miracle, maybe a little more, in Igatpuri. Right. And I've gone there 3 times already. And it's such a pleasure to be able to sit in it's in the Ghats, it's a beautiful place, and it's well organized and it's clean and the food is good. And all you're expected to do is sit for 10 hours a day, and whatever thoughts come into your mind, allow them to go out of your mind also. Because the more you think, the more you continue to think even more. And then you will start, instead of being focused on focusing on and developing whatever you have faith in, you will start to instead ask yourself what might be going wrong. And then anxiety will occur, and worry will occur. And worry is praying for what you don't want to happen. It's putting your attention on what you don't want to happen instead of putting your attention on what you do want to happen. Chinta se chaturai gate. When there is chinta, when there is worry, then your cleverness gajjate is depleted.
Dr. Robert, thank you so much for this profound knowledge and for being here with me. Before we end it, I want my audience to know about the books that you have written and where they can find them, and your website and your social media handles.
I've written 3 books about my mentor, Vimalananda. The first one is called Agora. The second one is Agora 2, Agora 3. Second one is about Kundalini. Third one is about the law of karma. They're all published by Rupa. I've also written 3 books on Jyotish. 2 with Hart Defoe. One is called Light on Life, and that is published by Penguin. And the second is called Light on Relationship, which is published by Motilal. And the third is called The Greatness of Saturn, which is a translation of the Shani Mahatmya. So it's meant as something to read when you're having difficulty with Shani, particularly during your Sadhisati, the 7.5-year period that Shani transits your natal moon. Wrote one book about Ayurveda for women that I believe is still available, is available here in India. Some of my books are available abroad and not available over here.
Wonderful. So thank you so much once again. And we have the social media handles put up here, and you can follow him and do let us know your comments. We're going to read it, of course. So if you have any questions, please put it down. And maybe in the next session with him, he can answer it for you. On that note, lots of love. Bye. Namaste. Bye.